Normally, adventurers head into dungeons to loot treasure chests. But when you play with the Mimighuls, it's the treasure chests, or rather their inhabitants, that'll be doing the looting. The Mimighul style of gameplay revolves around gifting your opponent wonderful, beautiful treasure boxes that give them a nasty surprise when they're opened. Let's take a look at Mimighul Archfiend to see how this works in practice. The Mimighul strategy is all about flip monsters. But unlike most flip monsters, you absolutely do not want these ones to flip face up on your side of the field. Take a look at this flip effect. If Mimighul Archfiend flips face up during the main phase, these three things happen. First, the opponent of the duelist who controls Mimighul Archfiend draws a card. Then, the player who controls Mimighul Archfiend must send a card from their hand to the graveyard. And finally, Mimighul Archfiend scurries over to the other side of the field. It's a devastating swing in momentum, and that's why you want to make sure that this card is flipping face up on your opponent's side of the field. That's why all of the Mimighul flip monsters in the Infinite Forbidden have this effect. During your main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's field in face-down defense position. With this effect, you can set your opponent up for a huge fall when the wonderful monster you've gifted them flips face up. Of course, your opponent isn't likely going to want to ever flip it face up, so the Mimighul strategy has a number of ways to encourage them to open up their presents. In fact, there's even one built in to Mimighul Archfiend. Mimighul Archfiends actually work well together in pairs thanks to this final effect. You can special summon one to your opponent's field face down, and then normal summon the other to force it to flip. Do that, and you draw a card, while your opponent sends one from their hand to the graveyard, and then you get that flipped Archfiend on your side of the field, where you now have 2 level 1 monsters available to do whatever you wish. Your opponent has also activated a monster effect during your main phase, albeit against their will, so you could even follow up with Triple Tactics talent to dispose of another card from their hand and plan out the rest of your turn. There are 3 Mimighul flip monsters in the Infinite Forbidden, and they each have their own unique ways of causing trouble for your opponent, while either progressing or protecting your own strategy. Mimighul Cerberus flip effect banishes 3 cards from the top of the controller's deck, then forces its controller to hand over one of their banished monsters to the opponent before switching control. Its continuous effect keeps the opponent from targeting your face-up spell cards with card effects. The latter effect will help you keep the field spell that shows the Mimighul's home turf safe and sound. Mimighul Dragon's flip effect, on the other hand, destroys all of its controller's face-up monsters, except for Mimighul's, of course, before it heads over to the other side of the field. This monster is very safety conscious, don't you think? Dragon also has an effect when it's normal or special summoned to add a Mimighul spell or trap from your deck to your hand. The Mimighul spell and trap cards are vital to victory, so you'll be using this effect a lot. The home turf of the Mimighuls is the Mimighul Dungeon field spell. Inside the dungeon, players are compelled to flip monsters face up. Why? Well, it's not the spirit of adventure, that's for sure. It's because Mimighul Dungeon prevents players who control face-down monsters from normal summoning or attacking with monsters they special summon during the current turn. So what your opponent is going to want to do is try and flip summon any Mimighuls you give them first, so they can play their turn in as much peace as they can after going down a card and possibly having to give away a key monster from their deck. Given that, there's one very important rule that we need to know regarding when you're allowed to manually change the battle position of a monster, since that's what a flip summon is. You can't flip summon a monster the turn it was placed on the field, be that special summoning it face down or just setting it from your hand. You also can't flip summon a monster that you just normal or special summoned that was subsequently flipped face down by a card like Book of Moon. If you go first and give your opponent a Mimighul, they're going to try to get rid of it as fast as possible, and if they can avoid flipping it, for example by sending it to the graveyard with Diabellstar the Black Witch, then they'll try to do that. Knowing this, you'll want to have a method on hand of giving them another face-down monster, either special summoning one to their field, or flipping one of their monsters face down. If you succeed, they won't be able to flip summon that monster, and they'll have to play by the rules of the dungeon. Speaking of the rules of the dungeon, they also specify how your low attack flip monsters are going to get the attack points they need to win you the duel. Mimighoul monsters that weren't summoned or set in the current turn gain attack points equal to their defense points. So Dragon becomes 2500 attack, Cerberus becomes 2200 attack, and Archfiend becomes 1900 attack. Not bad for a group of level 1 monsters. Finally, while Mimighoul Dungeon is in play, you'll get to add a new Mimighoul monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand each turn. This is a strategy that needs a lot of monsters to work, and Dungeon will make sure you never run out. In fact, having access to monsters is so important that there's not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 different Mimighoul cards that add Mimighoul monsters to your hand and/or special summon them to the field. Here are 2 of the others. Mimighoul Maker lets you get 2 different flip monsters out of your deck and randomly summon one to your opponent's field face down, while the other is added to your hand. After that, you can special summon any Mimighoul from your hand. With this one card, you could conceivably lay a trap on your opponent's field and spring it at the same time without using your normal summon. Maybe you could use that to your advantage by adding some adventurers to your deck. If you're a real risk taker, you can include non-Mimighoul flip monsters in your deck and find them with this card. Maybe you want to fetch Cyberjar out of your deck and don't care whose field it ends up on. Or maybe you want to roll the dice on simulating the effect of Delinquent Duo by pulling Fire Sorcerer from your deck and hoping it ends up on your opponent's field. Your opponent will have a hard time keeping the monster you give them face down, because Mimighoul Maker also has a graveyard effect that lets you switch the battle position of a face-down monster your opponent controls if they special summon a monster. Mimighoul Room is the perfect card to confound your opponent. It can special summon any Mimighoul from your hand or deck to either player's field, face up if it's on your side, letting you use its beneficial effects, or face down on your opponent's side, looking to cause trouble. As we discussed earlier, you can't flip summon a monster the turn it was special summoned face down, even if your opponent special summoned it to your field. So a monster given to the opponent with Mimighoul Room is going to stay face down until acted on by another effect. This card is great for keeping your opponent trapped in the dungeon, even after they voluntarily flip their Mimighouls face up. And it also has a graveyard effect that lets you return any number of Mimighoul cards you control to your hand. This second effect is useful because the roles played by each of the monsters changes as the duel progresses. For example, if you're going first, you don't want to give your opponent Mimighoul Dragon because they can flip it without consequence on their turn. You do want to summon it to your field to get a Mimighoul spell or trap card. If you're going second, you do want to give Dragon to your opponent so you can clear their existing monsters out before trying to lock them up in the dungeon. But when your next turn rolls around, you'll need the effect to grab a spell or trap card to keep your strategy rolling. The graveyard effect of Mimighoul Room lets you switch the role your monsters play, without needing to add a second copy of that monster to your hand with one of your other effects. The final Mimighoul card in the Infinite Forbidden is the mastermind behind the mayhem, Mimighoul Master. It can't be destroyed by battle or card effects if your opponent controls any face-down monsters or you control any other Mimighouls. While in the dungeon, its attack rises to 3,000. As you might expect, the Master of the Mimighouls can grab another Mimighoul monster from your deck when it's normal or special summon, and can also dictate when, during your opponent's main phase, that face-down monster should flip up. Obviously, this is great for triggering Mimighoul effects. But the Master can also flip a monster on your side of the field face up as well, in case you wanted to trigger the effect of something like Guard Dog at the most devastating timing possible. The Infinite Forbidden is just the beginning for the Mimighoul strategy. More Mimighoul cards will be released in the fall, so make sure to take the time to master the first set over the summer. The Infinite Forbidden launches on July 17th at official tournament stores, and on the 19th everywhere else the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG is sold.